Okay, friends, good evening and welcome to this class entitled From Moses to Manischewitz. And we're going to talk about the history of matzah. We're going to talk about it. We're going to stop and 4 different points in Jewish history. The first, we're going to talk about the story of the original matzah that we ate. And then we're going to talk about the matzah that was eaten right after, after the destruction of the Second Temple. We'll talk about the matzah as it was when the machine matzahs came about. We're going to talk about the baking of matzah as it took place under the Soviet regime. 4 stops along, and that will bring us to the year 2025 when we're going to speak about matzahs that we're about to eat this year. So it's going to be a good class, and we're going to talk a little bit about and like I promised, they said the matzah will never taste the same. So that's my promise to you. That's my promise to you. All right. So where do we begin? Well, we begin with the Torah. And that's what I'm going to do over here is I'm going to begin with the first instruction of the Torah. But before we begin with the Torah itself, there's a very interesting anecdote. We begin the Haggadah on the night of Pesach, and how does the Haggadah begin? What are the first words we say when we tell the story of Pesach after the Kiddush, and we're ready to sit down, and we're ready to say the words of the Haggadah? So we begin with the words, Hey lach ma'anya, this is the bread of affliction, the achala of asana that our fathers ate, be'ara de Mitzrayim, in the land of Egypt. Familiar with this statement?
Mm-hmm.
This is the bread
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Well, so the commentators asked the question. They say, wait a second. This is the bread of affliction that our fathers ate in the land of Egypt. Didn't they eat the bread? Didn't they bake it after they leave Egypt? Did they bake it after they leave Egypt? What do you mean they eat it in the land of Egypt? And what the commentators answer, and they say, and there's a story of Rabbi Avram Even Ezra, he's in the 12th and 13th century. He is a commentator on the classic, one of the classic commentators of the Torah. He has a unique approach, what's called pshat. He takes things at a very, very literal and basic level, and he explains them that way. And he says, let me tell you, he says, when the Jews were in Egypt and when they were slaves in Egypt, what do you think they ate as slaves in Egypt? What do you think they ate as slaves? They ate matzah. And Rabbi Avram Even Ezra says, I'll prove it to you. Because he says, he was traveling in India, and weird things happen when one travels in India, and he was taken captive. He was brought into captivity. And he said, what did they feed me while I was in captivity? They fed me matzah. Because the matzah is very, very cheap. It's very easy to make. And it's digestion. It takes a long time to digest. It's quite a filling food. So one of the things that what do they feed me? What do they feed us? They feed us matzah. And it's even today, very, very tragically, we're learning the story as the hostages come out, and they tell us about the terrible torture and treatment that they underwent. And part of the story is often that what were they fed? Pita. They were fed a pita. Why? Because it's a very simple food. It's a very easy food. It's a very it stays around for a very long time, and it's cheap and it's easy to digest. I'm sorry, and it takes a long time to digest. It's very filling. So the first matzah that we say that we mentioned that Agada, we say, Hey lach ma'anya, this is the bread of affliction, the achala of asana that our fathers ate, be'ara de Mitzrayim, when they were still in Egypt, is a a throwback in a sense. So you want to know when we originally ate the matzah, we were actually slaves, and they were feeding us the food of slaves. And what was that food of slaves? That was matzah. That was the first matzah. But then the matzah comes to symbolize freedom. Comes to symbolize freedom. So here we have the first appearance in the Torah of the mitzvah to eat matzah. It's a very, very fascinating appearance because this takes place 2 weeks prior to the Jewish people leaving Egypt. Here we see in Exodus 12, Hashem comes to Moshe and he tells them this month should be the beginning of the months, and he gives them instructions. He says, Dabru el kol adas Yisrael lemar, speak to the entire community of Israel and say, Be'asor lachodesh hazeh, on the 10th of this month, in 10 days, v'yikulam ish sel aves avot, each man should take a sheep for a family, sell a sheep or a lamb for each household, and then they tell him that you should take the sheep and you should put the blood of the sheep on the lintels, on the posts, and then it says, "V'achlu es habasar balayla hazeh," and you should eat on that night when prior to going out of Egypt, as you anticipate the redemption. V'achlu es habasar, you should eat the meat of the sacrifice that you're going to bring while you're still in Egypt, knowing on the night that Hashem is going to strike the plague of the firstborn, knowing that the Jews will be set free. Eat the meat, sli'esh, eat it roasted over a fire, umatzot al merorim yochlu, and you should eat it with matzah and maror. So ahead of the Jewish people is going out of Egypt, they know that this is going to be the night that they're going to go out. As a matter of fact, if you look over here in text 11, it says, "V'chacha tochlu oso." Here's how you should eat it. Here's how you should eat it. You have, Alan, are you able to read the screen?
I am, but I have a question first. Why the 10th of the month? Why not the 14th or the 15th of the month?
Good question. So they were supposed to take the lamb on the 10th of the month and check it for 4 days and actually sacrifice it on the 14th and eat it on the night going into the 15th, which would be the night of the B'dikat Chametz.
Okay.
And it's a fantastic question. Part of the reason that they were supposed to do that is because they were supposed to pronounce and announce to anybody who said, well, why you have these sheep in your house? What are you doing with them? And they were supposed to say, God is going to take us out, and we're preparing this. And they held it for 4 days as an act of faith, and then the declaration that that we believe Hashem is going to take us out of Egypt, and that ultimately we're going to we're going to be free, and we're going to be making this sacrifice in 4 days' time. So be warned, be warned. So
this is how you shall eat it: your loins girded, your sandals on your feet, and your staff in your hand. And you shall eat it hurriedly. It is a Passover offering. For that night I will go through the land of Egypt and strike down every firstborn in the land of Egypt, both human and beast, and I will mete out punishments to all the gods of Egypt. I, Hashem.
Yeah. So in other words, this is a very powerful imagery over here. Eat it, ready to go, have your loins girded. In other words, you're ready to run out of the house. Sandals on your feet. Who wears sandals in their feet during a meal of but staff in your hand. Ready to go. Display your readiness. But what are you eating? You're eating the Pesach lamb. You're eating the matzah, and you're eating maror. Now, fascinatingly, so some of the commentators say, like, why are they eating matzah? There was no. The whole story of the matzah not having time to go out didn't yet happen. But Hashem was projecting into the future. He was telling them, eat it now before you even get out, because you're going to leave in such a rush that you're not going to have time to bake bread. So they were told their future story ahead of time. They were told you're going to leave in such a rush and you're not even going to have time for your bread to rise. So eat unleavened bread prior to going out, because as a sign of what's going to happen to you after you go out. So
And what?
Yeah.
And why maror at this time?
Because the maror is a throwback to the bitter time. So in other words, it's the totality of the Pesach, the Matzah and Maror are the totality of the haste that we got out of Egypt, the celebration that we are sacrificed for Hashem, and the Maror is and the bitter times that we come from. But here, this what's fascinating is the people are having a Seder celebrating the Exodus, and as if the story already happened, as if they already had to leave in a haste, but they still hadn't yet left.
So the first Seder is
Seder
before the Exodus.
Is hours before the Exodus. The Exodus takes place at midnight. That's where the story of Cinderella comes from. I mean, you think I'm not joking? Here it says,
I understand.
Yeah. Bachatzi halayla. Look at verse 29. Basha, could you read it? Could you read the screen?
I'm having a little trouble with it.
Okay. Vadim, could you read 29?
Sure. In English?
Yeah.
In the middle of the night, Hashem struck down all the male firstborn in land of Egypt, from the firstborn of Pharaoh to sat on the throne, to the firstborn of captive who was in the dungeons, and all the firstborn of the cattle.
Yeah. And the word actually, I don't like this translation in the middle of the night, because chatzi, if you know any Hebrew, what does the word chatzi mean?
It's half.
Half. Means exactly midnight. It doesn't just mean in the middle of the night. But chatzi halayla means at the half of night, at midnight. So Pharaoh comes and he sends the Jewish people and he says, run, 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 run. And here we have the story of Vatechazak 33, Vatechazak Mitzrayim ala'am. The Egyptians forced the chazak means they used their power. They overpowered the people. Limaher l'shalcham minar, to rush them, to send them out of the land. Ki amru, because the Egyptians said, kulanu mesim, we're all going to die. This is not going to stop with the firstborn. Everybody's going to die. Just get out. Get out. You guys are the problem. And the people took the dough terem yachamach, before it becomes leavened. Misharosam, they took it, their kneading bowls, tzrurot b'simlosam, wrapped in their garments, in wrapped in sacks, al shichmam, on their shoulder, they're carrying dough, because they didn't even have time to. Egypt says, go, go, go. Don't pack yourself lunches. Don't make sandwiches. Just go. So what do? They're carrying dough out of Egypt.
Rabbi, you're going too fast for me.
Yeah.
Cinderella.
Yes.
You mentioned Cinderella. How is this the story of Cinderella?
Well, I mean, the story of the clock strikes midnight. That was the midnight. Just that story.
So tell me directly. Did you just make this up, which is okay with me,
yes.
or have you heard this before?
No, I made it up, but it seems
okay.
Now, where does this clock struck midnight come from? Seems to me that's the.
Okay, thank you. I like it. I just wanted to know where it came from.
No problem. Okay.
By the way, I like it when you do make things up.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So now we're on 39. So now they rush out of Egypt and they're carrying this dough on their shoulders. So now in 39, you want to read 39, Alan?
Sure. And they baked unleavened cakes of the dough that they had taken out of Egypt, for it was not leavened, since they had been driven out of Egypt and could not delay, nor had they prepared any provisions for themselves.
So as they go out of Egypt, they have, what are they carrying? They're just schlepping this dough on their shoulders, and they, as they arrive in a place called Sukkot, as we see right before. They came from Ramses, which is in Egypt, to Sukkot, which is on the other side of the border. And when they come to Sukkot, they bake their dough, matzah. Okay. So here we've already spoken about 3 times that the Jewish people eat matzah. The first matzah that we spoke about, which is not mentioned a lot in the commentary, but it's not mentioned in the Torah at all, but it's referenced in the Haggadah. The first matzah was the matzah, the bread of affliction. The first matzah it's that bread that they're fed because they are slaves and they're eating slave food. And they're slaves and they're being fed matzah, the most basic food, which is the most basic manufacturing process, and which is kind of takes a long time to digest. So it's the cheapest way to feed slaves. That's the first matzah, which, like I said, we don't really speak much of it. But now in that context, we think about, but then they're told to eat the matzah on that night ahead of the going out, because eat it before you're going to go out, before midnight, because you're going to go in such a haste that you're not even going to have time to bake bread. And therefore, you're going to today, there's the expression is, you're going to manifest the rushing out of creation. You're going to manifest it to the point that once it happens, you're going to play out what you've already played out before. You're going to rush out and you're going to have to eat the matzah, which you already knew you're going to have to. Okay. Then at midnight, the plague strikes and the Egyptians are rushing the Jews out of Egypt. And when they go out of Egypt, the Egyptians say, just go, go, go. And they're carrying sacks of dough out of Egypt. And they come from Ramses, come to Sukkot, and over there they bake the matzah.
Rabbi, before you go on, can you move back to lines 37, please?
37, yes.
600,000 fighting men,
Yeah.
aside from non-combatants. Did the sages have the sages spoken about how many total Jews there were?
Yeah, they usually give the number about 2 million, between 2 or 3 million, because we have 600,000 men between the age of 20 and 60
fighting,
and then we have equal amount of women of that age, and then we have children. So they usually talk about, in the realm of 3 million.
Okay. Good. Thank you.
Okay, so here we have the matzah that the Jewish people eat that night, and the matzah that they eat the next day, the matzah that they eat the night prior to going out, the food of faith, the food of belief, knowing that they're going to go out. It's the meal that they're celebrating the redemption that hasn't yet happened. They're displaying their faith. They're eating matzah and maror, and they're having a seder, knowing that they're going to be going out. I mean, the act, the courage, the faith, that they're displaying that night. And by the way, they had to also have a bris milah. They ahead of bringing the Pesach sacrifice. So it's a whole tararam. I mean, obviously, 9 plagues had already happened. So this isn't just coming out of the blue. This is, already. We're deep into the story. But by the time the 10th plague comes around, and that Hashem says, eat it with girded loins, sandals on your feet, hold your walking staffs, ready to go, and eat the matzah. And then Hashem comes, and there's the revelation of freedom, and then there's the matzah that we eat the next day.
Rabbi, have the sages talked about how long it took for those first 9 plagues?
Yes, 1 month per plague.
Thank you.
Now, the plague itself did not take a month, but there was the process of the plague. In other words, there's a warning process. Every plague took about 1 week, but every plague took 1 week of a month.
Thank you.
Yeah. The Talmud actually tells us that from Rosh Hashanah already, for the last 6 months, the Jews were already in a much greater state of freedom, because the plagues were were wearing down the Egyptians.
Mhm.
Okay, so this is the original matzah that the Jewish people eat as they, like I said, as they leave Egypt, and it's the matzah that we carry with us today. It's our story. It's the story of the food, which itself is kind of our it represents the slavery that becomes the act of faith, and that becomes the act of freedom. This what represented the slavery becomes the act of faith, becomes the food that they eat that night, and then it becomes the food of freedom. It becomes the first food that they eat, and they're rushing out of Egypt. So that's the first story I wanted to tell you. Now I want to tell you another story. There is the next story. I want to skip ahead, and I want to go to the I want to go to the Haggadah over here. And one second, sorry. So the next story is the one that's going to happen. Haggadah. Okay. So let's go to this is the story. I'm sorry, I'm just gonna scroll through this that we read in our during the Seder night. So you recognize this. Okay. Vadim, you want to read where it says it happened?
It happened with Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Yeshua, Rabbi Eliezer ben Azriah, Rabbi Akiva, and Rabbi Tarfon were reclining at Seder in Bnei Brak. They were discussing the exodus from Egypt all that night until their students came and told them, "Our masters, the time has come for reclining the morning Shema."
Yeah, beautiful. So
Right.
now it happened. So let's just go back for a moment to the story you just read. This is a famous story that we read in Haggadah. You probably remember it. It happened that Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Yeshua, Rabbi Eliezer ben Azariah, Rabbi Akiva, and Rabbi Tarfon were reclining at a Seder in Bnei Brak. Now, there's something very fascinating about this story. If we do because first of all, why are they in Bnei Brak? Bnei Brak means that they're not in Jerusalem because this takes place sometime shortly after the destruction of the Second Temple. So here we are about over well over 1,000 years from that first matzah that we spoke about, or it was 1,500 years after that first matzah that we spoke about. And now we are all the way past the first temple has been destroyed, and the second temple has been destroyed, and the great sages of Israel, Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Yeshua, Rabbi Eliezer ben Azariah, Rabbi Akiva, and Rabbi Tarfon are reclining at a Seder. But where are they? They're in Bnei Brak. They're out of Jerusalem. And this is a Seder that clearly takes place at a very difficult time in our history, because these are survivors of the destruction of the Second Temple, and Rabbi Akiva, we know, is eventually he's going to get killed about 52 years after the destruction of the Second Temple. He's going to get killed by the Romans, in part for his support of the of Bar Kokhba and the Bar Kokhba revolt, and in general, the Romans are going to come and they're going to crush the revolt in a crushing way, and they're going to kill Rabbi Akiva among the others. So we're talking about a challenging period in Jewish history. And still, what are they doing? What are the Jewish people doing? Well, what do we do? What do we do? They're sitting and they're spending their Seder night, and they're spending the whole night talking about the Exodus. They're spending the whole night talking about the Exodus. So we see that this idea is that they're not, the temple has been destroyed. They don't have the Pesach sacrifice. They're living under Roman occupation. But what are they doing? They're eating the matzah, and they're spending the entire night discussing the Exodus, to the point that their sages come and they say, dawn is broken. It's already morning. You've discussed this the idea of the Exodus for the whole night, and in a sense, the Rebbe has told us, and that they're telling their students are saying not only that it's morning, but they're saying that you've illuminated the night, you've lit up the night. In other words, at a very dark point in Jewish history, or at a very trying point in Jewish history, it's a night. But they said, our masters, the time has come to recite the morning Shema. In other words, you've brought about the light. You've brought about the light. How do we bring about the light? We bring about the light by sharing and by discussing and by having the Seder. This is the story of bringing about the light. And so this story it features prominently in the story, in the Haggadah, and in the story of the in the Pesach story. From here, so this takes place, roughly around, somewhere between the destruction of the second temple, which is in the year 70, and then in the year 122, the Bar Kokhba revolt is crushed by the Romans. So we're talking about in that era. So we're talking about, in the very, very beginning of Common Era, after the destruction of the second temple. Let's make another stop in Jewish history, a fascinating stop. And that is a stop this takes place in the 1830s. In the 1830s. And in the 1830s, we're experiencing the Industrial Revolution, and we're experiencing the Industrial Revolution, and we're experiencing all things are turning into machines. And of course, somebody has a great idea, and they say, what do we need to do? We need to start baking matzah with machines. So, let's play this from the beginning of the slide. So in 1838, we have the first, there's a Industrial Revolution, and the first introduction of a rabbi of Singer he says his name is Isaac Singer, and he says, we'll make matzahs by a machine. And guess what?
And where are we, Rabbi? What city?
In France.
Thank you.
And the French and the German rabbis generally, they say this is the Western European rabbis, they say this is a great idea. We're modernizing, society is modernizing, and not only that, but there's innovation, and they love the idea of innovation. They love the idea of innovation. Well, at that time, there is a lot of pushback from the many of the leading Hasidic rabbis of that time, and they push back about, and they say, "Oh, no." They say, "We're not going to start making matzahs with machine. Matzahs have to be made by hand, and machines are not so. They don't have all the advantages that are needed to make matzah, as we're going to see." And they basically line up in two camps, and this is taking the Jewish world by storm. And as a matter of fact, this debate is raging, and it's actually taking place also in the first Yiddish newspaper. The first Yiddish newspaper is where there's all these columns and all these reports of who's for what, and who's for it, and who's against it. So, as you see over here, there's other rabbis. There's a whole group of rabbis who are for the machine matzah. Notably among them, there's a rabbi, his name is Rabbi Yosef Shaul Nathanson, and he writes 20 letters. In other words, there's in a back and forth, he writes 20 letters in the defense of the machines that have been advanced to make matzah. And there's a Rabbi Kluger who is kind of leads the pack against these machine-made matzah. Rabbi Kluger writes 10 letters saying, talking about how these machines are not so, it's not a good idea to use the machines. Now.
And Rabbi, I cannot see, I don't know about anyone else, I cannot see the download. It says your download is in progress. So are you seeing it? And is everyone else seeing it?
I'm sorry. I did.
Don't see it.
You're not seeing. I'm sorry. You know what happened is that
Now I see you.
Perfect. I thank you for letting
but not the download.
Thank you. So now.
Yes. Thank you, Rabbi.
Okay, I appreciate that. So we're up to here. We're up to the slide here, where we have 10. But we have 10 letters, kind of. 10 letters that are saying that only handmade matzah can be used. We have 20 letters talking about the fact that we can also use machine-made matzahs, and this is in the mid 1800s. This becomes a major dispute among the Jewish communities. Now, what's the kind of the basis of the dispute? Well, there's some practical applications. One is that they say, those who say, we would never allow our matzahs to be made by machines. They say because simply, the dough gets stuck in the machine, and it's not that's a problem. We don't want our dough stuck in the machine. The others say, what are you talking about? They say we've inspected these machines, and they have, incredible processes. They're incredibly well made. There's no dough that's getting stuck. And so this is kind of a matter of a factual dispute, or a dispute of whether or not, we're able to ensure that there's no dough stuck in the system. Because if there is dough stuck in the system, that dough will become chametz, and that dough will eventually make everything else chametz. So that's going to be a big problem. Another aspect of their debate is that they say that the machine heats itself up, and it heats up the dough, and if it heats up the dough will actually rise faster. Another interesting aspect of the debate is that a case is made and saying, well, an interesting aspect is they say there's a social economic benefit of having people roll the matzah, because who used to roll the matzah? Widows and orphans used to work in the bakeries rolling the matzah. Others say that the machines couldn't. They say that the machines weren't able to feel the kernels and weren't able to know if the dough was kind of fully processed. And the biggest attack on the machines are the idea that it's an act of enlightenment, or it's an act of we're introducing scientific methods to a tradition that shouldn't really should stay pure. Now, the others, of course, those who are in defense of the machines say no, the machines are actually better, they're more efficient, they run quicker. The machine, the matzah that's made in a machine is it's much more predictable. Anyhow, this is the story of the first kind of debates, are more practical debates. Now there's another debate, there's another aspect, which is kavanah, intent. When we make matzah, we're supposed to watch over the matzah. It says, we're supposed to watch over the matzah. So those who say that you can't use machines, you have to have kavanah when you make the matzah. As a matter of fact, if you've ever been in a matzah bakery, they say the words l'shem matzot mitzvah. The matzah, we're doing this for the sake of the matzah. We're doing this for the sake of the matzah. So we have intent. Can a machine have intent? Well, Those who are for the machine say yes, the machine can have intent because the operator of the machine operates the machine with intent. So this is a very, very big story, and it kind of becomes the story of the Jewish story of its time, and this is taking place in Europe. A really interesting thing happens in the late 1800s. There is a rabbi whose name is Rabbi Dov Ber Abramson. Rabbi Dov Ber Abramson comes to the United States in the 1800s, in the late 1800s, and he actually comes on a fake passport. He comes and he assumed, how did he get here? Because somehow he got here with a passport where it had the last name Manischewitz. There was a Manischewitz who died somewhere, and so Abramson, so you can imagine, instead of Manischewitz matzah, we could have had an Abramson matzah. But he couldn't get out as Abramson. He gets out as Manischewitz, and he comes to Cincinnati, and he builds a little bakery in his basement. And here is the most fascinating part. You know who's buying his matzahs? Who's buying his matzahs? He's not even making matzah for Pesach. You know who he's selling matzahs to? He's selling matzahs to all those who are traveling west to follow the Oregon Trail, to go to the Gold Rush. He's selling I have for you a bread which will preserve, which will stay a long time. And he's the guy, he's a marketing genius. He's a marketing genius. He sells matzah not as a Pesach food. He sells matzah as a bread to take with you when you travel out west. Going west, you're going on the Oregon Trail, you're trying to go to the California Gold Rush or whatnot, pack some matzah with you. In 1900, he opens a massive factory. He has the largest oven in the world in his time, fully automated factory, and he's producing 75,000 pounds a day.
Whoa.
1903, he incorporates Matzah Mel. He becomes the producer of more than half of the matzah in the United States. Ultimately, today, his matzahs are, of course, they're very affordable. They are far cheaper than the handmade matzahs. However, important to understand that these Manischewitz matzahs have, while they may be kosher for Pesach, when it comes to the matzah that's used for the Seder, they have some serious deficiency. First of all, they're not made with the specially guarded wheat, which we're supposed to use for the Seder, hence what we call matzah shmura. Mm-hmm. It's not made with because the wheat that we use at the Seder, the wheat that we use at our matzah we use at the Seder is guarded at least from the time of the grinding of the wheat. If not from the time of the grinding of the wheat, it should be guarded from the time of the at least from the time of the grinding of wheat. Better if it's guarded from the time of the harvesting of the wheat. But which is what we have. We have shmura mishas k'tzira. The wheat that we use has been guarded from the time that it was harvested. Number two is that there's, with the machine, like we said, there isn't the intent. And when we may eat the matzah at the Seder, we want to capture the kavanah, the ushmatem es hamatzot. So we go ahead. That's why in Chabad we go ahead and we give, and the Rebbe told us to give, to distribute, and to make sure everybody has the handmade shmura matzah, because it should be making it by hand with intent, and it's guarded from the time of the harvesting of the grain. These are all add to the potency and to the energy, to the freedom energy of the matzah. So it's far more expensive, but it's also far more potent. It's that food of freedom. It's that food of freedom. But the story of Manischewitz is an incredible story. It's this one man who ultimately in 1990, this company is sold for $42.5 million. In 1998, it's resold for $124 million, and it continues to be sold, and it continues to be the key ingredient and the key provider, I should say, of Jewish foods, and specifically of matzah, Manischewitz is well known. Now, there's another aspect about the matzah, which is that our matzot are specifically round. What's the advantage of round matzot? First of all, it symbolizes the idea of matzah is the circle in Jewish tradition symbolizes the circle of life, the circle of fortune. So there's the advantage of the matzahs being round. There's also the idea of when the Jewish people left Egypt. If you remember, Alan, what you read, it said that they ate the cake, ugot matzos. They ate the cake matzot. So there was that advantage. So there's the idea of it being made by hand, and being made by love, being made alive. These are all some of the ideas of the power of why we specifically don't use the machine matzah, but why we specifically use the hand matzah. However, while we're on it, I figured I'll just kind of take a little tour here of the Manischewitz bakery. It's just an interesting little tour. Take a look at it.
First night of Passover, and it's something you will find at most Seders. Of course, we're talking about matzah.
My kids are eating them all the time these days, but have you ever wondered how it's made? We sent Jennifer Lammers to find out in this edition of Jen at Work.
It's Passover, and of course, the star of any Passover Seder is the matzah. So we came here to the biggest matzah manufacturer in the country, Manischewitz Company Factory in Newark, New Jersey, to find out how it's all done. Come on. Hello.
Hi, Jen. How are you?
Good. How are you?
I'm Sarah Stromer. I'm the assistant brand manager here.
Excellent.
And we're going to have you help us make matzah today.
Okay.
And we're going to have you see everything from start to finish, from the mixing of the dough to boxing up, and all ready to go out to the stores.
Perfect.
But first, we have to go get suited up.
All right. I'm ready. Let's go. The warehouse alone is 180,000 square feet. All the food here is kosher, and it starts.
Oh, wow.
It's a lot.
That is a lot of dough.
Right here, where water meets flour.
If you want to speed along the process, because we only have 18 minutes to make this matzah.
Oh, wow.
And does the clock start like with this?
Yeah. Onto the factory floor, where 7 layers of dough are pressed and rolled into one. Standing by to make sure each and every piece of matzah is up to kosher standard, the head mashgiach, Benjamin Gordon.
Okay, so Benjamin, you work an 11-hour shift, right? And how long are you here looking at all these squares of matzah coming out of the conveyor belt?
Around 2 hours. 3
2 hours.
Straight.
You've got to get dizzy, right?
A little bit. Looking for the matzah to have all the holes,
Okay.
and then no imperfections. And if it's out of my reach, I have this that would pull it out.
Wow, look at how quick that was.
It's fishing.
Pretty amazing. See, I've done that with lasagna when you're trying to get out of the pot. Yeah? Can I try?
Huh?
Oh my gosh. First try. I can't believe that.
Now to the oven, where in 2 minutes it's toasted to crispy perfection.
So we're going to check on the matzah to see how it's baking.
Wow.
So look at it. See the flames. It looks nice. It's getting a little nice brown color. Okay, so now the matzah's coming out of the oven, and we have 2 mashgiachim here watching the matzah, inspecting it, making sure that it looks good. So this is a good piece.
Can I
Want to
try it? Yeah.
It's hot matzah. There's nothing better than hot matzah.
That's hot. That is hot.
So right now, the matzah's coming out from the cooler, and it's being stacked. And we want to make sure that each stack has the right amount, which is 9. See, there's a broken piece over there. She has to get rid of it. She has to pull the stack because now it has 8 pieces. But we need to make sure every stack has 9 pieces. So she'll pull a stack of 8, and she'll pull off from another one.
No mathematician, but I think our 18 minutes are up, and it's time for my grade.
This is the fruits of our labor right here.
Exactly.
All in a day's work. So
All that matzah.
you are a matzah making machine, Sarah.
We are.
I only hope that I lived up to those standards. How would you grade me? Let's hear it.
I'd give you an A minus.
A minus.
Yeah, it's a very complicated process, even though it's only 2 ingredients, flour and water. We did it. You learned it. You were really helpful on the line.
Thank you.
Everyone enjoyed your company today.
I enjoyed everyone's company. So shall we cheers?
Yes, we'll have a l'chaim with the Manischewitz grape juice.
Perfect. All kosher.
Exactly.
Wishing you a happy Passover at work at Manischewitz. Jennifer Lammers, Fox 5 News.
All right, so that was the Manischewitz, the handmade matzah. The machine-made matzah, and that's how it works. It's quite an incredible work of art. Somebody said that what Mr. Rabbi Manischewitz did for matzah is what Henry Ford did to the car. He really mass-produced and was able to do that. I want to focus on one more story before we kind of come to our matzah, and that's the story of the matzah, the way it was produced in the former Soviet Union. And this is a story actually that the Rebbe himself tells, because his father was the one who was involved in the story. So I'll let the Rebbe tell it to us, but it's going to be in Russian. And what's fascinating is that this is in 1984, and the Rebbe's talking in Russian. And the reason for that, there'll be subtitles, but the reason for that is because apparently there were people who would be going to Russia and they would be bringing recordings of these of this talk, and the Rebbe kind of anticipated that it would be distributed to Russian Jewry. So he tells the story of how his father oversaw the baking of matzah and the matzah factory, and defied, in a sense, the Soviet Union, and to make sure that there would be kosher matzah available for everybody. So here's the story here.
Of the 20th of Av marks the yahrzeit of the Rebbe's father, Rabbi Levi Yitzhak Schneerson of righteous memory. At a time when rabbis were suffering greatly under Stalinist oppression, Rabbi Levi Yitzhak stood his ground as chief rabbi of one of the largest Jewish centers in Ukraine, in many respects shouldering the burden as de facto leader of Ukrainian Jewry. A story told by the Rebbe to a gathering of children on the 106th anniversary of his father's birthday.
Как уже я рассказал в прошлый раз, что случилось с моим отцом, что он был раввином в УССР и главным раввином в городе Днепропетровске, который был одним из главных городов всей Украины, который поставляла зерно, пшеницу для большой части России, и когда приходило время приготовить муку для мацы, приезжали со всей УССР на Украину закупать пшеницу. И так как в этом нуждались для Пасхи, то они хотели иметь гехшер, удостоверение от главного раввина, что это кошерно для Пасхи. Когда пришли к нему и сказали обо всем этом, так отец ответил, что он с большой радостью возьмет на себя эту обязанность, но с одним условием, которое само собой понятно, что если он даст удостоверение, что это кошерно для Песах, он должен быть убежден через то, что он поставит своих машгихим, и они будут наблюдать, что пшеницу, которая будет перемелена на муку, кошерная, без воды, и также весь перемол меление муки будет также без воды. И что тогда, когда не примешивает воду, тогда получается меньше муки, и получается более комплицированно, и это связано с большими расходами. Тогда к нему пришли от управления губернии города, где он был главным раввином, и сказали, что он саботажник и хочет ввести правительство в дефицит, чтобы они истратили много тысяч рублей для того, чтобы это было кошерно. Так он им ответил, что согласно Конституции и согласно его совести, и согласно совести каждого нормального человека, если он дает удостоверение, что это кошерно, он должен быть убежден в этом. И никто не может его заставить, чтобы он писал то, что против его совести, что не правда, стопроцентная ложь. Тогда ему предложили, чтобы он поехал в Москву, и там говорил с президентом Калининым, который был тогда, или с его представителем, и ему изложил все его соображения, что, несмотря на то, что это обойдется мельницам, которые все были под правительственным управлением, обойдется им в сотни тысяч рублей, так нельзя заставить еврея, чтобы он ел мацу, которая не кошерна, и обмануть его. Говорят, что правительство говорит, что это нужно солгать и сказать, что это кошерно, хотя они знают, что это не кошерно. И когда он изложил все эти доводы в Москве, он получил официальное разрешение. И не только разрешение, но было также указание по всей Украине, что во всех тех местах, которые раввинский сон пошлет своих представителей, дать удостоверение, что это кошерная мука. Им все содействовали и помогали, даже если это будет связано с расходами, и не с там расходами, но с большими расходами. И так это было сделано и проведено по всей Украине. И, как я сказал прежде, что это еще одно доказательство, что когда доводит положение, описывает, как оно в действительности, что еврей хочет воспитывать своих детей согласно его убеждениям, и что он хочет соблюдать субботу и соблюдать Пасху как следует, тогда, если только обращаются к настоящим властям там, они не только не препятствуют, но указывают милиции и всем властям по местам, чтобы они не только не мешали, но охраняли, чтобы другие не мешали евреям вести ежедневную жизнь по-еврейски.
So this is the that's the story that the Rebbe tells of his father and the way that they would bake the matzahs while they were in Ukraine and under the Soviet regime. Tragically, the story has a sad ending because actually it was a week before Pesach and they arrested the Rebbe's father as the Rebbe as he had been warned, counter-revolutionary activities, and basically he's taking a defiant stand to the Soviet Union.
What year was this, Rabbi?
1939. And he knew that they were taking him out. It was a week before Pesach, so he just asked that he should bring some matzah with him. He took with him some matzah, a bag of matzah, and they sentenced him to exile. And 5 years later, in 1944, he died actually in exile, in really giving, kind of paying the highest price for taking, proud and a high stand for the values and the principles of Yiddishkeit. But that kind of brings us to all the way back, all the way here to today, where essentially we went through and we spoke about the matzah that the Jewish people ate, when they were slaves in Egypt, and the matzah that they ate the night that they were about to go out, and then the matzah that they ate right after they go out of Egypt. And then we spoke about the fact that the Jewish people eat the matzah in the second, at the time of the second, at the destruction of the second temple. And we spoke about the Industrial Revolution and how the matzah becomes the whole center of the revolution, whether or not we revolutionize the matzah. And finally, we get to the this 1939 story of the Rebbe and baking matzah, the Rebbe's father baking matzah, and standing up to the Soviet regime, making sure that the flour would be indeed kosher for Pesach and not just kind of signing off on what they wanted. And here we are in 2025, and we are about over 3,300 years after the original matzah, and we're still eating the matzah, and the food of our faith, the food that's come to symbolize that it begins as the food of our poverty, but it continues and it became the food, the symbol of our faith, the symbol that even before we have time to for our bread to rise, even before we have opportunity to bake a sandwich, everything could change, and Hashem, and everything will change. Hashem brings redemption, like it says, Yeshua Hashem, the salvation of Hashem, keherifai, and it comes like the blink of an eye. In the blink of an eye, it can all change, and the world, and it symbolizes, because Hashem is ultimately the operator. So this year, when we eat our matzah, we should have in mind all of these kavanot, and all of these stories, and all of its history, and all of its richness, and all of its meaning, and here we are. So I want to wish you a very happy and a kosher Pesach, and I think it was very, very. I very much enjoyed learning about myself, just going through kind of I love always think about the story of the matzah. So I hope you did as well.
Rabbi, before we depart tonight, I would ask you to put to allow us to see each other so we can see all of our faces. No, we see the outside prayers item.
1 second.
Okay. Because I have a question that I would like to open up to our entire group.
Okay, sure.